when you're picking rock stars out there, it's not about what they can do, it's about what you can give them and why they should join you.
Welcome to My Best Hire. I'm your host, Rajiv Soni. On this show, we decode how great leaders identify exceptional talent and how outstanding professionals become invaluable to their organizations. Through in-depth conversations with executives and business leaders, we uncover both sides of the success equation, helping leaders build stronger teams while showing professionals how to stand out and make a lasting impact. So whether you are building teams or looking to advance your own career, join us as we explore the stories of remarkable talent and the leaders who recognize their potential. Today on the podcast, we have my good friend Bindi Dharia with us. Bindi has a master's in engineering from University of Michigan and an MBA from Harvard. She has worked in the impact space for over 10 years. And since she is a fellow Michigan Wolverine, go blue. Bindi, you are doing some amazing stuff. Why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and your career?
Good. Thanks, Rajiv. I mean, like Rajiv said, I'm an engineer and worked in manufacturing for a bit and then switched over to the impact world about 12 years ago. So I've been working across various organizations, and now I'm building something called as We All, which is a giving platform to build individualized giving journeys to connect, contribute, and create a better world. So we are building a tech platform to engage individuals, specifically youth, to give their time, talent, and resources for causes they care about. So sort of like giving at your fingertips, right? The way you choose and the way you want. So that's essentially what I'm doing right now, Rajiv.
Very cool. We are on my best hire. So tell us about your best hires.
So it's very difficult. This question when you asked me was, I think I have a bunch of rock stars in my team. But if I was to pick a few, I think at the top of my list was somebody who worked with me at Ashoka University, was Pramit Banerjee. And then I had another person at Ashoka University. I think that team was probably one of my best. But there's Soumya. I didn't recruit her, but she's definitely one of my other rock stars. And then I think pick one from recently in We All, and my CTO, I think Kapil Mohan is one of those where I would say he's a complete total rock star right now. So
very cool. So who are we speaking about today?
If I think about it across, Pramit probably would be the one that we would talk about.
Okay. So it's a big deal that you have chosen Pramit to be your best hire. What did he do? Can you walk us through one incident where it gave you the confidence and the structure that Pramit is the one that you want to speak about today?
Sure. So I think Pramit, he's a Gandhi fellow and has worked again in the impact space from Calcutta. A young guy when he came to work with me, honestly, and he was doing freelance consulting. So ended up working with me on a project that I was doing with Goonj, very briefly. So he was working with somebody else that I was working with, but I could see sparks of talent. But then when at Ashoka, I had a big gap that was there where we had a lot of attrition. I had just joined the Center for Social Impact and Philanthropy at Ashoka University, and we had close to about 3 or 4 people quit. And we had a very, very important project with the government of India and a funder, which is Omidyar. And we were struggling at that point to find somebody to do that project. And Pramit just happened to put his hand up and he said, Bindi, you're looking for someone. I'm interested. I would love to sit and talk to you about it. And he came in, he wanted to eventually do impact investing. This was a project on norms and regulations in the nonprofit world. So looking at financial regulation norms. And it was just beautiful seamlessly and so I wasn't even part of the recruiting process because I had to put my hand up saying, I have existing knowledge about this person. I will not interview him. So I let my boss interview him because I knew, I'd already told her I have worked with him. So I knew how good he was at somewhere. And so we got him on board. And I think, Rajiv, it was a crunch project, right? When you have the government and an important donor sitting there. Pramit came in and interestingly, he did secondary research of things that we didn't ask him to do, first of all. So he stepped up and picked up things where he thought the gaps were. Then he also had to do full accountability. So I had to not think about the project at all, which was a huge thing, 30-year-old guy coming in at that point, but taking full responsibility of the project. And then he worked to give us a research report, which eventually actually became the base for the social stock exchange. So a lot of people use that document that he created, a bunch of donors, and use that to eventually work towards building the social stock exchange currently, which exists for the nonprofit world. And then obviously he became a super important part, right? Like eventually he worked to build the strategy of the center with me. So somebody who had done fundraising, but he worked with me throughout. He did research in the nonprofit world and a lot of secondary research to understand what the gaps are, what the needs are. And then eventually went on to build that strategy with me, which was just seminal work. Because I don't think we could have done all this work if he would not have joined the team. I think I needed somebody to sort of like having, how do you say, a deputy to you in a sense. And he sort of just took over everything without me having to think. And that became a really good thing. It also shifted because we had so much attrition. I think somewhere a new person coming in infused an energy, which made a huge difference because then all of a sudden there was positive movement there happening. The team was delivering. And then obviously we had a bunch of other people join, and that I think got the entire momentum going beautifully. But I think he was that, how do you say, like that rolling stone that just pushed us to move like a lot faster and a lot easier. I used to say Pramit is like gold, right? So almost, and I've said that over and over to him, like you're probably one of the best hires out there. And it's a reality. Like I think my boss at that point interviewed him and like 5 minutes in and she was like sure that he's the guy we wanted on the team.
He did a lot of very important work for you. So if we can dive into a particular incident.
Sure. So I think what he did, Rajiv, was, like I said, the project for the government, everything he did. So he did a whole bunch of secondary research on the financial norms in the nonprofit world. So looking at rating agencies, looking at organizations that do evaluation of nonprofit organization, looking at measurement and evaluation parameters out there, and then building an entire research report on that. And he's not a researcher. He's like, he was a fundraiser prior to this, but so he worked like a consultant in a sense and put together this 20-30 page report, and then simultaneously work to identify other gaps in the sector and then work to like build a strategy for the center with me on that. I think his main instance was this piece where in a span of a couple of months, he had this research report ready. He had workable points on what we could do with this report. So what could people take in action on it? And then work on to actually help build all the plans for what happen to be like the stock exchange, right? So I think this sort of an end-to-end thing where you're moving from sort of research to operations to execution. He ended up doing the entire piece himself.
It's amazing. So what was the impact on your organization? How did you use that report? What did it lead to that wouldn't have happened if Pramit was not there?
So, I mean, that report was just in a flux state. I think we had donor money sitting in the bank. If Pramit would not have joined, I don't think we would have had a report. Honestly, I don't think we had any. We've had somebody leave, and post her leaving, there was a big lack. There was a gap that existed in the org, and the person, unfortunately, because she was sick, had not done a lot of work. So we were way behind deadline with the donor. We had the government obviously asking for something, and so him coming in just made sure like all the work got done. Plus, him coming in produced, I think, 10x of what we were expecting. That's what I would say is, I don't think the base of that stock exchange was part of the mandate. But because he ended up doing so much more and feeding into all these pieces, he ended up creating way more documents than we would have thought about. And then when he did that gap analysis, I don't think we would have built a strategy in 6 months. So we had a document that we were sitting on, which actually led to us raising 3x funds in that. So I think he built that with me, that strategy for the next 2 years, which I don't think would have been possible if Pramit was not part of that team, because it takes a different kind of a brain to think through things and then work on figuring out, and to think macro plus micro, because you're looking at execution plus you're looking at strategy, and you're doing it both simultaneously while like not having somebody constantly watching your back, right? Like he didn't need oversight. It was highly accountable. I knew that if it's on his desk, he can walk away. And then I could focus on 50 other projects. So, I mean, actually what happened was he offloaded a lot of my work, which otherwise I would have had to do with, say, another junior person that was coming in at his level. So to me, it was a huge shift from where I was. I mean, almost like he came in at a very important position for me.
Understood. Okay, so I'm just going to mark here. So, Bindi, one thing is not coming out is, okay, they created a report. Okay, now it's not clear that is that report was what was the final deliverable? Was it this? Because it's coming off, at least here, is that it's coming off as that, okay, hey, that he created a report. Okay, now the people outside do not know that this report is actually the deliverable.
So, Rajiv, I think the report was the deliverable, but I think what came out was actually the guidelines for the social.
So, Bindi, it will be very useful if you can tell us what is social stock exchange and what is the value of that.
So, social stock exchange was declared, by the government of India in one of the budgets about like 2 or 3 years ago, or even further up. And the idea was, how can you find a good way to actually evaluate nonprofit organizations and then list them sort of on an exchange based on impact, so that it becomes easier for philanthropists and other entities to actually, international and national, to invest in nonprofit organizations and then have a way of evaluating them on an exchange based on their work and their other deliverables, and then go ahead. And so it becomes an easy way. So you have standard compliances and processes, and then it's government mandated. So it becomes like a interesting process over there. So I think it's still in the initial stages right now, but they have multiple NGOs onboarded now, and a number of senior philanthropic organizations, including Zerodha and Amit Chandra from Bain Capital, and some of the others have all invested money. Nilakini's, they've all invested money in the social stock exchange in NGOs that are credible organizations. Sorry, I can't hear you, Rajiv.
So, social stock exchange is almost like a stock exchange where, on one hand, you have the NGOs and the nonprofits who are looking to raise funding, and on the other hand, you have the investors. So, just like a normal stock exchange where your investors come in and they invest in stocks and organizations. So here, the donors, as well as some of the people who are looking to invest in certain aspects of the nonprofit world, they come in and they can select the nonprofits where they want to invest.
Correct. The only difference is obviously the measurement is not on a bottom line; it's on impact. So that's
Yes.
that's the big difference for the stock exchange. So.
Now that's a big deal. That's huge. So can you tell us, like, it sounds like Pramit did a lot of work in terms of putting all of this structure together. So what was the original mandate and how did he being involved? It seems like he expanded the mandate.
So I think the original mandate was just a research report.
Okay.
I mean, we just needed to put out these compliance rules and norms, and it would have been a nice research report. But somebody had built the initial base off, and then he was doing the next level, which would have been sort of a proposed execution plan for the sector. So more like for philanthropic and organizations to implement. The government was not going to be involved at that point of time. And then somewhere the finance minister declared the social stock exchange, and Pramit, because his report had been given, multiple funders took this report as a base, and then they used this to design the social stock exchange. So I don't think, if he wouldn't have been there, I don't think this report would have existed. They might have used something else maybe, or not had as much information to start from to build something, and it would have taken a lot more time to even build this. So I think from the point when it was declared to them taking all this information and then working the bill, it was very fast because there was whole base of work that he had built. And I think that made a huge difference. It wouldn't have happened. Otherwise, they would have spent another 3-4 years doing all of this research and then actually building a stock exchange on top of it. And right now that stock exchange is functional. You have a number of NGOs. People are investing in it. So it moved a lot faster just because I think there was somebody who had built the space for them.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So going into the next aspect of this, what skills and capabilities and attributes do you think that Pramit demonstrated that allowed him to have such a huge impact at the whole country level, across different organizations, across multiple donors in this whole nonprofit space?
So I think one major skill, and I think that I see in almost every candidate, is entrepreneurial skill, right? This ability to actually take full ownership of something, make it their own, and then run without any oversight is a big skill, right? Like, because if he had somebody watching over his shoulder, they would have probably declared, like they would have listed down the bulleted points of what he needed to do. But when he took full ownership, he just ran it. So he ended up doing way more than he was expected to do because he decided that he realized the extent of what could be done himself. I think the other piece, Rajiv, for me, is this ability to do logical reasoning and thinking, right? Like this point that he could take so much information out there, assimilate it, and then break it down in a manner that somebody could make sense of it in a very simple way. Like it was literally a presentation that he created by the end of it. There's a research report of 20, 30 pages, but like it was literally a deck that they used to have these dialogues initially, right? And to be able to do that whole translation is a skill set, I think, that most people don't have, to simplify it to a point where somebody can take it and run with it. I think that was a big piece. And then from there to take, research and then suggest actionable points. That's another skill set that I don't see that exists. Like you don't find people actually moving from research to action. Research functions independently, action functions independently. Here, there was a person who was bridging this whole thing end to end. And that skill set, I think, was very seminal for me. I think the other piece for me was high ownership. I look at it in every candidate, this ability to wear multiple hats, but take full ownership where your manager doesn't have to worry about the work. And that to me is a huge skill set, because if he wouldn't have taken that, I think we wouldn't have done as much as we did and the speed at which we did. Because I think he just took the project and ran with it and worked super fast with it, and that made a difference. And yeah, I think it's diligence. I don't know the other adjectives to use out there, but I think diligence was one of those things that he used, which I think made him stand out than others out there that I have seen.
A lot of the best hires that we speak about, while they do great individual work, but they also not somehow, but with their skills and capabilities, improve the capabilities for the rest of the team and actually have the whole team do better. Do you have an example of that?
For sure. I think, and he comes from this ecosystem, which I call the Gandhi Fellowship ecosystem, where, they come with this process of there's constant reflection, there's thought. And I think when Pramit came in, he introduced some of these processes in the organization. I'll give you an example. There's something that he said we should debrief. So after every meeting, after every conversation, he would stop and say, let's stop and reflect. Just introducing that simple process of reflection into our processes made a huge difference, because then all of a sudden you were reevaluating each of your pieces. And that actually, at the end of the meeting, automatically you say what was good, bad, ugly, and instantly decide for the next meeting. It becomes a lot easier to function. The other piece is he's very process oriented. So I think he's somebody who insists on a process for no matter what you do. So he would send a game plan for every meeting. He would send information. He would send a note ahead of time. And I think that forced the rest of the team to become process oriented. I think because we were a very small team, we were functioning like a startup over there. And I think Pramit coming in sort of instilled, we started putting a lot of processes in place, which helped to then scale up the entire team for us. Because we realized where our gaps are. We started putting systems in place. And he was one of those people who pushed for it. I think maybe that's just the way he functions, that he thinks that way, where he needs point 1, point 2, point 3. But that forced all of us to think with systems and processes. And that made a huge difference, I think, the way we functioned as an organization. Because even though we were a small team, I think we got a lot more efficient as an organization with him coming in on the team.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think besides that, he also pushed the bar. I think when you have an overachiever, you sort of push that bar for everyone, right? So if you can show that you step up, I think he forced the other 3 people on the team or 4 people on the team to step up as much as he did. So I think there were people who told him, hey, you're making us look bad, stop working as much. But I think the reality is, I think he was pushing the bar a lot higher for everybody else in the team, including me, because when somebody tells you, I'll give you work in 3 days and it shows up in a day, it's not like he was overworking himself.
Mm-hmm.
He was doing multiple other things. He was doing his MBA in parallel remotely. At some point, he picked up another job with obviously my permission, where I introduced him to another place where he was doing impact investing because he wanted to learn about it. And so we ended up working with another firm in the evenings, and he was still able to deliver way above the rest. And so I think he sort of pushed the bar for everybody in the teams.
Awesome. Can you talk a little bit about your professional relationship? How did that develop? How did that mature?
So I think for me, that relationship evolved. I think when he came in or when he worked with me on the Goonj project, I think he was a consultant with me, right? It was somebody that we had a very transactional relationship where I would send across work and I got back work. When he started at Ashoka with me at CSIP, initially it was a very, like I said, it's transactional, but as I started seeing the level of work that he could do, and his ability, I think slowly I realized I could challenge him even more. I could give him more work. I could give him projects that I wouldn't have thought, right? I would have never thought of building our organization's strategy with person that junior, right? But the fact that I could see him stepping up to the game, I sat at the table with him to build that strategy, right? So I started developing like a faith in this person that he could do way more. And I started pushing him and his limits. Because I knew that he could do and he could excel at what he was doing in a very different way. And he just hadn't gotten the opportunities in his previous positions or wherever he was earlier. And so I started giving him more than he could do. And eventually, so our relationship evolved there, right? Because somewhere he became a peer because he started stepping up to the game. So we didn't have this boss employee relationship, right? He could also call me out. We could joke about it, but he could challenge me, right? And that became a very interesting relationship over the years. He didn't start with that. I think he was very reticent. He thought twice before telling me something. But as he got this space, as he took on more and more work, it became an equal relationship to a point where actually, I've gone to him for advice for my startup. He now works with an impact organization and I've gone to him for advice. I mean, he was giving me feedback on my pitch for We All, and he's been doing that over the years. He recently, has been helping me think through which funders should I be talking in the space. So it's become to a point where now he's become a peer or an advisor. So it's a reverse dynamic now. I mean, obviously I continue to he comes to me for advice when he goes in. I mean, he's every job that he's picked, he's come to me for advice. But I think it's become a very different relationship now as it's evolved over the years.
I can imagine. So obviously, working relationship is a two-way street. So can you shed a little bit more light on how you have such a strong performer on your team? How did you make sure that while he was on your team, he was getting the right opportunities, he was getting the right feedback to make this better? How did you further help along his career? Definitely one of the areas you spoke about was the flexibility to go and take on another whole job where he was working in the area that was of interest to him. But I would love to hear more details on that.
So I think, Raji, the couple of things, right? Very early on, and this is, I think, in my career, I realized because when I started my first job, I had people who had 30 years work experience and I was a young engineer. So very early on as a boss, I realized I could never tell somebody how to do their job. I actually learned from them how to do my job better. And I always recruit people. This is advice somebody had given me, that recruit people who are smarter than you, who know more than you in areas that you are bringing them on board. And which was the case with him as well, right? So I realized I become a facilitator rather than a boss, or where I just have to make sure the person has access to resources, access to people, and access to a network out there where they then can learn themselves and grow as individuals, right? And so with Pramit also, I realized that's what I started doing. The moment I saw him step up, I said, I'm going to just connect you to people, right? Like, I'm going to let you run the show. I will just make sure I'm standing behind you, that you don't fall, but you have the ability to do what makes sense over here. So, and I think that made a huge difference. I think when people realize that you have faith in their abilities, you trust their judgment, the ownership level increases. I think the accountability increases and they step up a lot more. And so for whatever reason, I think I've done this over the years and it's gotten better and better. The process that I put in place and which I do regularly even now is we sort of sit at the end, like every month I sit with people that report into me and just have a conversation in terms of what can I do to help you do your job better? What do you need? What do you require? And how can I help it? So I think even his second job came from there where he said, I am very keen pursue impact investing. Whereas you started me on this journey, but I don't know how to go there. He started with taking a class at Ashoka with Karthik, and then I think went on to do a job with him. Somebody I introduced him to who I know from my network, and then that's how then he's now transitioned to work with an impact investing fund. So it's just how it works is I really feel I'm a facilitator. Like that's my job, is how do you move pieces and connect the dots.
Absolutely. Facilitating, improving. It sounds like that he got the second job and the opportunity based on your introductions and your network.
Well, I mean, I think it's also his potential. He's a rock
Yes.
star, so I have nothing to take away from him. I think I just had to nudge him a little bit more, right? So he was already doing, he just needed a little bit more of a push or a little bit more access, which not everybody has. So sometimes it's the job of the boss to say, you spread your wings, I'm not going to stop you. And this is something my boss did, right? When I was at ArcelorMittal, my boss said, you're a firework. I can't stop you. So you're going to go and do what you have to do. I'm never going to stand in your career. And which is a reality. She wrote one of the best recommendations I had needed for Harvard. I don't think I mean, they literally asked me in my interview, your boss wrote such nice things. So I'm just saying I learned from some of the best bosses out there that you don't stand in people's way. You just help them go where they want to go. And I think people matter more, honestly, Rajiv. For me, I've realized over the years they come back. They will engage with you again if you invest in them. The org might suffer if they leave for sure, but they tend to leave in a way which helps the org even more if you continue to invest in them. And he did, right? So even when he quit, he continued to help the team till they transitioned over. So I think that's the beauty of people if you invest in them as people and not as cogs in the system or people who will do the job and are replaceable. So that I think is super important.
Absolutely. And my next question that I have, you have answered it in many different ways, in different places, but I want to bring all of that together in one place. How did working with Pramit impact your own profile way of working and your professional outlook about the people that you work with?
Firstly, one is I'm telling you, it's systems. I mean, I make a lot of lists, but I do work in a little bit of chaos. And I think working with him made me get a little bit more systematized, get a little bit more organized, and actually pushed me to think. This also the reflection process that he introduced really helped me. So I've actually institutionalized that in my organization where we stop, we think, and we pause. And we actually reflect and think of what we should do. I mean, I think those are the two things that I can think of that changed me as a leader with him. Yeah, I can't think of anything else besides that.
That's totally okay. Not a problem at all. So I know that you didn't hire Pramit, but
No, I did hire him. I didn't do his interview, but I did hire him. He was
you
my
did.
find. So,
Understood.
yeah.
Understood. So what recommendation would you have for the recruiters or for other leaders who are looking to actually hire people like Pramit in their organizations?
I mean, I think these are difficult ones, right? So you need to sell. So I think when I recruited him, I actually
Mm.
didn't interview him, right? But I sold the organization even before he met my boss. Sold it to a point where I was like, he will be convinced to join the team. Because I think when you're picking rock stars out there, it's not about what they can do, it's about what you can give them and why they should join you. Because they're rock stars. They'll get jobs in 10 organizations. But if you don't sell the organization, I don't think it's possible. And I think when you're looking for these people, I would say don't look for skill sets, look for personality traits. So I think the entrepreneurial spirit, the ability, the diligence, the ownership is just super important in any individual, right? Because they will learn the skill. It doesn't take a lot when somebody's entrepreneurial to go do a course out there, to go do research. If you actually, if they have that base and that need to learn. Whereas if you pick somebody who has a very niche skill set but doesn't have this ability, then they don't step up further. And then you have to constantly keep pushing them. So they might have done a PhD in something, but if they don't, they're not self starters. I think at least for me, that I'm not a micro person. So I leave a person and let them do their job. I most certainly would say I need somebody who can run on their own and do their gig. So
Absolutely makes sense. And when you have hired such high agency, high ownership people in your team, what recommendation would you have for the leaders how to manage such people?
like I said, you challenge them and you let them do their work. You push them, you understand what they need. I think people like that get bored very easily
Mm.
because they are high achievers. They can do the job in their sleep half the time. So they're almost working at, I used to say, I work at 40%, 90% of the time, right? And if you want me to work 100%, you need to give me 3x amount of work. And I think it's the same thing when I pick these rock stars. I go with that ideology that give them more than what they can do because they rise up and they deliver to that level. I'm not saying break them and burn out, but I'm saying challenge them more, because if you go with the norm, these high achievers will not step up to that game, right? They will just be bored. They'll finish their work, then they'll look out and shop for other things. Especially in today's world, people will shop more, right? Like they'll be doing then 3 moonlighting jobs simultaneously. So you need to give them a lot more than what they can do, and which then obviously helps you as well, because they'll deliver for 2 or 3 people like Pramit did, right?
Understood. Understood. So that's a little bit of a controversial take in terms of giving them a lot more than like, okay, are you paying them more as well?
I'm not, see, I think, Rajiv, it's not about exploiting them, right? You're giving them 40 hours worth or 50 hours worth of. I personally don't think anybody should be working weekends. I think people should have a life, right? The fact that Pramit could do another job and his MBA, he had enough time. But if I would have left Pramit to do only one project, I think he would have gotten bored very easily. So he was doing 3 in parallel, because then he could switch around when he was bored with one. He could do something else. He could think through more. So it was more than what he could. Otherwise, like if I would have taken another person who was not a super performer, they would have done only one at a time and like single-mindedly focused on it. This person needed 3, 4 different things simultaneously. And I think when I say more than what they can do, that's what I mean. I don't mean to a point where they're overburdened or overworked. I don't do it, right? I don't work weekends even now. I take time off, and I believe that everybody should have a life. It is essential. Like that's a no-brainer, because to think creatively, actually, you need to stop. You need to actually take those breaks. Even as an entrepreneur, I'm very clear. I don't do this 70-hour, 90-hour work weeks that I don't expect my team to do. I do a lot more, and so I push all of them to do a lot more. And I think Pramit also used to do a lot more extracurriculars. Like, I think if I remember correctly, I'm not sure what he does, but I know he had a motorcycle that he used to ride around, but other things I don't know.
I got that.
Yeah.
So keep them engaged, keep them challenged,
Yeah.
keep it fresh for them. And while balancing to make sure that they are learning throughout the process and maintaining a good work-life balance.
Absolutely. And give them work that sort of is a little bit higher, where they have to like step up more. So it's a little more than what they require.
Understood. Understood. So my last question for you is, a lot of the listeners for this podcast, they want to become like Pramit. They want to become become amazing professionals. What recommendation would you have for such professionals? How to become more like?
That's a difficult one. I used to always think these are special made ones, but then I realized I had a whole team of them, so can't be just one person. I think it's about understanding what the pain point for your boss is, and then actually working to fill those pain points, right? Like, I think the beauty of Pramit was he would ask you, what do you need? And then he would get that job done without me telling him what I required, right? And when you want to step up, and there's a beautiful book actually written by Vivek Gambhir and Sundar Ramachandran. It's called Head Start. I hope I'm saying the name right.
Okay.
But it's actually a wonderful book that you can refer. I actually found it, the way it's broken down, on how you become indispensable for your boss and the company. And it's not to a point where you are, sucking up to your boss or anything, but you basically fill the voids where it's required. You do it with full autonomy, and you try and like deliver more than others, right? So you collaborate, you work, you step up, you help your peers. So overall, I think you join all the dots. And that's when like the boss will invest more in you, because you're delivering more than most. I think at some level, that's essentially what Pramit did, right? And I mean, he became indispensable in that team. When he left, I was like, you're not replaceable for me. But then, everybody, you can find somebody, but it's never the same, right?
I get that. Awesome. Those were the questions that I had for you. Bindi, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me on this. Any parting words?
Oh, this is wonderful, I think, Rajiv. I love the idea of it. I would have never reflected on this process of recruitment. So as I'm forming my team for my startup, there's a lot of thought process on how do you recruit and what kind of person to select. It's always been a gut feel for me. But as I'm breaking this down for you, I'm realizing there is a process to how you get your best hires in the team. So very helpful. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, I got that. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.